The way that forces move through the body is complex. With the pelvis, for example, it finds the stability to transfer loads safely in one main position called nutation. Now, I've covered this before, but really simply, it's basically some posterior pelvic tilt while the sacrum rocks forward. And the pelvis can rock in and out of nutation and something called counter nutation, which is just the opposite of that. Now, as a quick note, when I say a bit of posterior tilt, I mean a bit of posterior tilt, not max end range here. But generally, this is a stable position. And the reason for that is that there's sort of max joint congruity, which means that there's more joint contact area. And interestingly, it can essentially find this position in a somewhat neutral way. So like basically just the way that the joints are shaped plus gravity keeps everything together. Everything's sort of stable. And that's called form closure. But if we need to do something more dynamically, we need force closure, which is we need activation from all the muscles and ligaments around it to keep everything locked in a closed, packed, stable position. One thing that's postulated to help improve some of this stability and tension through like the SI area, so the sacroiliac joint, as well as like the lumbopelvic area, is to have simultaneous activation of the diaphragm with the pelvic floor. I found it was interesting that this was just sort of postulated because obviously that's going to increase pressure. We know that diaphragmatic activation increases intra-abdominal pressure, and the pelvic floor, it's almost like a trampoline at the bottom of your pelvis. It sort of pushes against the force of the diaphragm, and that increases pressure. So this pressure, sort of by requirement, is going to increase stability. Now you can test if things are going wrong in the ability to sort of transfer load here with a straight leg active raise. Apparently this really challenges the whole pelvic ring that the pelvic floor and like the SI joints all exist in. But if something was wrong in the body generally with how force was being transferred, look, there's a lot of different reasons for why this might happen. Like we can have a lot of different muscular and skeletal dysfunction. But one area that frankly I have neglected a lot is nerves. So if something isn't innervated, so if the innervation, that nerve pathway, is somehow interrupted one way or another, that's going to cause a whole host of issues. And very interestingly, so the nervous system is crazy complex. It's really hard to learn. It's something that I sort of avoided when I was learning anatomy because it looks so overwhelming. And something that's eased my mind in learning is about plexuses. So this is like a combination of nerves that split into other nerves. So they call them dorsal nerves. So essentially like the nerve roots near the spine will then split into the peripheral areas. So I guess we can learn the plexuses to get a broad idea for some dysfunction that could happen that would affect muscular activation and then potentially force transfer. So the four main ones are the cervical, the brachial, so coming down the arm, the lumbar, and the sacral. Obviously the lumbar and sacral being the two that will probably be the most relevant to the points I was just discussing previously. On this point of dysfunctioning, I also just learned about how things can go wrong in whiplash. This is of very keen interest to me as someone who has backflipped and landed on their head. I think I've had some sort of whiplash. And I learned that generally speaking, you're going to get some more negative repercussions. It's always going to be sort of bad. The whiplash damages come from the extension portion of the movement as opposed to the flexion part where the head's coming forward. And I'd be remiss not to mention when talking about how force transfers through the body, that a lot of anatomy texts don't cover some information that I've recently learned about their different actions and functions. So this is honestly like a frustratingly common theme in learning anatomy, but reading Newman's kinesiology, I've been hearing a lot of different actions sort of put forward that I just want to really quickly list off because I think they are quite surprising. Just because they're not mentioned elsewhere. So for example, bilateral activation of the QL, the quadratus lumborum, leads to extension of the spine. Activation of the erectus spinae can anteriorly tilt the pelvis, which makes sense. We knew it could extend the spine, so kind of just a natural fall off of that if the pelvis wasn't fixed. The psoas can anteriorly tilt the pelvis as well if it is acting in a way where the pelvis is moving on the femur as opposed to femur on pelvis. Now for those of you who don't know, I've been learning all of this and more as a part of my 50 Days to Rebuild challenge, where I read 50 pages of a physio/exercise book and do 50 minutes of exercise in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. This is day 47 and most of what I've discovered now is from Newman's kinesiology. Looking at the exercise portion of things. So with the side plank, everything's gone pretty well, but with my shoulder, now that I'm not having to focus on my injured knee, I am noticing that I'm not getting consistent serratus activation, so just definitely something that I need to look at moving forward. With all my ankle stuff, so like the calf raises and the Patrick step, I'm very pleased with them because it's still really hard to maintain like a neutral foot, but I'm not shaking as early, which has been like pretty intense shakes. So to me, that's a good indicator that we're getting a little stronger, or even some more endurance. Okay, and I also ran through a bunch of hip stuff that I've been doing to improve my internal rotation. I may have included this in one video, but I want to show it here as well. The joint mobilization that I do, and this is a mobilization from Kelly Starrett. So I have the joint pulling inferiorly, and I try and internally rotate my leg. This kind of pulls the joint somewhat out of the socket, and that's what allows that movement to occur and mobilizes the joint capsule itself, which is often like a hidden or neglected limitation in movement. But what I learned today was rereading Becoming a Supple Leopard, just like I often use it as a bit of a reference text, which is by Kelly Starrett. Sorry, I was doing it wrong. He used like essentially relative internal rotation, so he would move his whole body basically over his leg, which leads to internal rotation, so his base leg is the one being pulled out of the socket, whereas mine is the top leg. I actually tried both, and I preferred my way of doing it. So I'm glad it's been working, I guess. With the 90-90 sort of isometric activation, or relatively, I try and get some height on it, but I can also do it isometrically. I feel like I'm getting a decent range. It wasn't moving at all previously, so anything is nice. On this windscreen wiper internal rotation I'm doing, I actually felt really good. I feel like I'm getting a lot of range. I do have to be careful not to let my core destabilize and sort of tilt forward and cheat the range. I did feel that happening at some points, but in general it feels like I'm getting really good range, which sort of suggests to me, like, yes, internal rotation has been a bit of a limitation, but perhaps it's not the real limitation, like something else is impeding its activation, like perhaps extension or flexion limitation, so now I can't express internal rotation properly. Also, though it wasn't perfect on both sides, I definitely had less sort of ability on the right, but I sort of dropped it a little bit and noticed that, it was pretty close to what I thought would be like a full range, so that was cool. Kneeling internal rotation, okay, not great, not perfect, but not bad. I feel like I'm getting some activation, but I don't see much movement. Again, lends into this idea that perhaps it's not actually the internal rotation that's the issue, it might be something else. And yeah, that is about it for day 47. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.